Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both.
That's Bob Camblin for you. Always hinting at those deeper layers, isn't he?
Yeah, really makes you think. Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. We are diving deep today into the world of artist Bob Camblin.
Our listener sent us a really amazing collection of his quotes, information about his life, and all these different perspectives on his art, especially his painting, Clear to the Sea.
And it's a lot to unpack.
It is. But that's our mission today. Really dig into all of it and pull out the good stuff. The insights, the connections, the things that'll make you go, oh, I see what he was doing there.
Right, for those aha moments. For our listener, we know you appreciate learning new things thoroughly but quickly. We want to give you those insights without bogging you down. And honestly, that's what we try to do every time.
Absolutely. So we went through everything you sent, all those materials on Camblin, and we've distilled it down to what we think are the most interesting parts, both about Camblin's life and his art and what he was trying to say.
Exactly. We'll be looking at Camblin's own words, which give us a glimpse into his mind, how he saw things. We'll also be looking at his biography, tracing his path as an artist. And we'll explore how people have interpreted his work, connecting it to these big ideas like Zen and our relationship with the environment.
And of course, we'll be spending some time with Clear to the Sea, looking closely at those images and what they might mean.
So first things first, who was Bob Camblin? I've seen him described as this widely recognized yet enigmatic figure. What do you make of that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Widely recognized. So he was clearly influential. People knew his work, but enigmatic. There's this mystery surrounding him. Like, we don't completely know him.
Yeah, and that mystery seems to extend to his art, too. We learned that Camblin's style, which was sometimes seen as controversial, earned him a ton of respect from other artists. Collectors really want his pieces. They're in high demand. But even with that influence, he remains sort of this elusive figure. A lot of his work isn't that well known.
Absolutely. And the biography really emphasizes how much he produced. I mean, we're talking oils, acrylics, watercolors, drawings, prints, and he even made art on painted paper. And it's mentioned that these pieces rarely come up for sale.
Really?
Yeah. And when they do, they're often snatched up quickly, often for quite a lot of money.
Wow. So let's go back to the beginning. Bob Camblin was born in Oklahoma in 1928. His formal art education started at the Kansas City Art Institute. And then something that seems like a real turning point, he got a Fulbright scholarship to go study in Italy.
It does seem like that was a really significant period for him. The biography talks about him being mesmerized by the grand masters of representative art and Impressionism. Imagine being a young artist and seeing those legendary works firsthand in the places where they were created.
Yeah, that must have been incredible.
He was especially moved by his time at the Uffizi Gallery, and, maybe a little unexpectedly, by the Capuchin Catacombs in Palermo, Sicily.
The catacombs, with all the mummies. That's a pretty stark contrast to those Renaissance masterpieces. It's interesting that these images, the biography even calls it mummy imagery, stayed with him.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how those visuals, those images of mortality, might have seeped into his later artwork, his themes, maybe even his techniques.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe that experience, seeing those bodies preserved from centuries past, made him really aware of our own mortality, the fact that life is fleeting. And maybe that influenced the things he chose to explore in his art.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. The biography also talks about his time in Ponca City, Oklahoma, before he left for Italy. It mentions how things like the rise and fall of the Marland estate and that iconic pioneer woman statue might have subtly influenced his work. And apparently, if you look really closely at some of his paintings, you can sometimes find these double VVs, a personal symbol for his mother, Viva Camblin.
Oh, wow.
Which references the pioneer woman. It's such a tiny personal detail hidden within these larger works.
Yeah. When you picture that huge monumental statue and then this little mark referencing it in his paintings, it connects his art to his personal history, to a sense of place.
Totally. And Camblin wasn't just influenced by what he saw. He was a big reader, too, right?
Oh, yeah, a really avid reader. The biography mentions him reading all sorts of things, like Emerson, the I Ching, haiku poetry, all very different forms of expression. But they all grapple with these big ideas, And I think that variety of perspectives probably shaped his thinking and his approach to making art.
Absolutely. Emerson's focus on individualism and self-reliance. The I Ching's exploration of change and how everything's connected. Haiku's emphasis on capturing a fleeting moment in nature. You can almost see those ideas woven into his artwork.
I agree. It suggests that he was constantly looking for connections, searching for different ways to understand the world. And we can't forget his time in the military. Even that period seems to have been artistically significant for him.
Yeah. The biography mentions that during the Korean War, he actually spent time sketching along the California coastline with another artist who was also surfing.
Wow.
It shows how dedicated he was to his art, even in the middle of a war. It wasn't just something he did in his free time. It was a fundamental part of how he connected with the world, even in really challenging circumstances.
So after these formative experiences, Camblin went on to teach at a number of really prestigious art schools.
Right. Ringling, the University of Illinois, the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, the University of Utah, and then Rice University in Houston. And it seems like his move to Rice was a pretty big deal. Houston became a real hub for his artistic development and his collaborations later on.
Yeah, and his time at all these universities probably gave him opportunities to connect with other artists, to bounce ideas around, and refine his own thinking about art. But then there was this really big turning point in his life in 1976. He decided to leave academia altogether and live this more nomadic lifestyle, completely devoting himself to his art.
That takes guts. What do you think prompted that change?
I think it shows how much he believed in his artistic vision. Maybe the structure of academia felt too limiting. Or maybe he just needed to be fully immersed in making art without the demands of teaching. The biography says that during this nomadic period, he supported himself by selling his work and doing commissions. And he traveled all over: Italy, France, Ireland, Mexico, the South Pacific.
Wow.
Imagine all the different visual and cultural influences he was exposed to.
That must have been an incredible period of growth.
I would think so. And it seems like this was the time when his ideas about art really solidified. He believed that art should speak directly to the viewer's soul.
Yeah. The biography emphasizes that he wanted to create art that evoked feelings and contemplation without needing a bunch of intellectual interpretation. He wanted that connection between the artwork and the person experiencing it to be more immediate, almost visceral.
It's like he was pushing back against those more conceptual or intellectual forms of art that were popular at the time.
Exactly. Maybe being away from the academic world, living this nomadic life, led him to focus on a more direct, intuitive way of expressing himself through art.
Yeah, something that could transcend cultural and intellectual barriers.
Okay, so let's talk about his artwork. We've heard that his earlier work had a social protest element to it, often using really strong outlines and flat areas of color.
Right, which makes sense. It suggests he was engaging with the social and political issues of his time and expressing those ideas in a bold, maybe even confrontational way, visually.
Yeah, but then his style shifted. He went through a period of abstract expressionism.
Right. Abstract expressionism was all about moving away from representational forms and more towards expressing emotions and the artist's inner world through the act of painting itself. Think Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning.
Yeah, and then in the 1970s, he pioneered this style called mouches volantes,
Wow.
which is French for flying flies, right?
Yes. It's described as a style using dots and dashes to create optical illusions.
Huh.
It really played with how people perceive his work. And it makes sense if you think about those influences we talked about before: Dada and surrealism. Dada rejected logic, embraced the absurd. Surrealism explored the subconscious mind. So with Mouche Volantes, Camblin might have been subverting expectations of what art should be, just like the Dadaists. And those shifting, illusory forms could have been inspired by surrealism's fascination with dreams and the irrational.
It sounds like he was really trying to make viewers question what they were seeing.
Right, tricking the eye into seeing movement or depth that isn't really there.
And he didn't always work alone, did he? He had this collaboration with Earl Staley and Joe Tate.
That's right. They formed a group called B&E Productions, and their whole thing was pushing the boundaries of art. They challenged those traditional notions of who an artist is and what constitutes a finished work of art.
So what did they actually do? Like, what kind of art did they make?
Well, it sounds like they did all sorts of things: performances, collaborative pieces, maybe even showing their art in unusual places. It seems like it was a very experimental and fluid period. And they emphasized the process of creation and the interplay between artists, maybe even more than the final product itself.
And there's also this really fascinating detail about Camblin. He believed in letting go of the ego.
Oh, yeah.
He often signed his work anonymously. In the beginning, she even used the name Mr. Peanut, and then later, just anonymous artists. It's a pretty bold statement in a world where an artist's signature is so tied to their identity and how much their work is worth.
It really is. To intentionally not take credit for your work, it shows how unconventional he was. And maybe he wanted to shift the focus away from the individual artist and onto the art itself.
Yeah.
and the viewer's experience.
Yeah, to let the work speak for itself. And that Mr. Peanut name, it adds this layer of absurdity.
Right, like a wink and a nod to those Dada influences we talked about.
Okay, let's talk about Clear to the Sea. We have a description of it here, and it really paints a picture in your mind. It's a tall, vertical canvas. And you're immediately drawn to this clearing in a forest, which opens up towards the horizon. And at the top of the canvas is this bright, almost perfectly circular sky.
Yeah, that circle is really key. It's interpreted as representing an enso, that Zen circle that symbolizes enlightenment, wholeness, strength, and the beauty of imperfection.
Right.
And that contrast between that luminous circle and the darker forest below really makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
It's like he's putting the ideal of enlightenment next to the realities of the physical world.
Yeah, that tension is really interesting. And in the middle and lower parts of the painting, we have tree stumps, broken branches. It's like the forest has been partially cleared or damaged. There's a small stream or path winding through, catching bits of light. And right near the bottom, there's this text, Clear to the Sea, painted on this reddish-orange banner.
Wow.
What do you make of those tree stumps and broken branches, especially in relation to that bright enso above?
Well, they definitely make you think about deforestation.
Yeah.
And the impact humans have on the natural world. And when you see those images of damage right next to that enso, that symbol of spiritual wholeness, it creates this tension.
Right.
Like, is Camblin suggesting that part of reaching enlightenment, or maybe even just understanding our place in the world, means confronting that damage? And that path winding through those broken branches, it reinforces the idea that it's not going to be an easy journey.
And then you have that text, Clear to the Sea. It seems like it could have a few different meanings. On one level, it could be about the environmental impact of deforestation with all that debris and runoff eventually ending up in the ocean.
Right.
But then it could also be about this journey towards clarity, towards openness, towards some kind of ultimate destination.
Yeah. The YouTube analysis you sent also pointed out that double meaning. It could be about physical transparency, but also about emotional and spiritual openness, like a path to infinite possibilities.
So, do you think one interpretation is more important than the other? Or was Camblin intentionally trying to make us consider both?
Honestly, I think the power of the painting comes from that ambiguity. The environmental message is hard to miss, but that enso and the idea of a journey towards something bigger, they suggest a deeper meaning too. Maybe Camblin wanted both interpretations to be there, to make us think about how our actions in the physical world are connected to our inner lives.
Okay, so let's bring in some of those philosophical and spiritual ideas we mentioned earlier, like Zen Buddhism. How do you see those ideas playing out in Clear to the Sea?
Well, like we said, the enso is a really strong link to Zen teachings. It embodies those core concepts of impermanence, that nothing stays the same, and the beauty of the imperfect. The path in the painting and those images of decay and regrowth in the forest, they can also be seen through a Zen lens. It's a reminder that enlightenment isn't a straightforward, perfect process. It's about moving through challenges, accepting all aspects of existence, the broken branches and the open sky.
And there are connections to the I Ching too, right?
Yeah, exactly. The YouTube video connects Clear to the Sea to hexagram 46 pushing upward. This hexagram symbolizes progress that comes from consistent effort and resilience, like a slow and steady climb towards a goal. And that imagery, the path winding through the forest towards the sky, really fits that idea of persevering, even when things are tough.
And maybe that bright circle represents the achievement at the end.
Right, something you earn through humility and perseverance.
It's amazing how these ancient philosophies seem to resonate with this painting, and even Taoism seems to have some echoes in the work.
Definitely, Taoism emphasizes going with the flow, being like water, finding the path of least resistance to reach your destination.
Right.
And in Clear to the Sea, even though the path is rough and there's destruction, that overall movement towards the open horizon suggests a similar idea, finding harmony and clarity in the midst of disruption. And that idea of becoming clear to the sea could be connected to Taoism's emphasis on aligning yourself with the natural order of things.
So many philosophical layers woven into a single image. And the sources also talk about this interesting coexistence of beauty and desolation in Clear to the Sea.
Yes, Camblin doesn't shy away from showing the impact on the forest. Those tree stumps are right there, evidence of destruction. But there's also this undeniable beauty in the scene. The luminous sky, the way the light catches the stream, it's that tension, that mix of loss and hope that makes the painting so powerful. It's not just a lament for the environment. There is still this sense of possibility, of something beyond.
And then there are those little details, almost like secrets hidden in the painting. The possible antlers on a stump, the Lady Liberty branches, the glimpses of what might be the artist's own studios, the remnants of Campbell stumps, and maybe even tulips. It adds another level of intrigue.
Definitely. Those little hints make you want to look closer, to spend time with the painting. And they suggest that there's more to see than what's immediately obvious, like layers of personal symbolism or echoes of the past still present in the landscape. It's like the painting is whispering to you if you take the time to really listen.
So, where does Clear to the Sea fit within art history? We've heard some comparisons to romantic landscape art.
Yeah, the strong contrast between light and dark, that sense of a vast and powerful natural world, definitely echoes those romantic ideas of the sublime, being in awe of nature's power. But as we talked about before, the key difference is that in Clear to the Sea, we see clear signs of human impact. That logging, those tree stumps, it's not this idealized, pristine wilderness
Hmm.
that the romantics often focused on.
It's more real.
Exactly.
Huh.
And it also contrasts with those Hudson River School painters who often celebrated the grandeur of untouched nature.
Right.
Those painters revered the pristine wilderness. But Clear to the Sea shows us what happens after humans interfere. It makes us think about the consequences of our actions, about how we coexist, maybe uneasily, with nature. It's taking a more modern concern and putting it into a traditional landscape setting.
But it does seem to connect with some other artists from the 20th century who were interested in the spiritual and ecological sides of forests.
Definitely. Emily Carr, for example. Her paintings of the forests in British Columbia are really powerful. And the Group of Seven, also exploring the Canadian wilderness. Even someone like Anselm Kiefer, who often deals with themes of history, memory, and the environment, engaged with forests in his work. But the analysis suggests that Camblin's take might be more cautionary. He's not just showing us the spiritual side of nature, he's also showing us the destruction.
Yeah. And he's not romanticizing it.
Right, like you said before, it's more real. And the contrast with Emily Carr is especially interesting. She often found the sacredness in those massive living trees. Camblin shows us the trees that have been cut down, the emptiness left behind.
What about those little altars or huts and the deer-like shapes that people sometimes see in Clear to the Sea? What do you think those represent?
It's like they're hinting at something sacred that's still there, or maybe a memory of the wildlife that used to live in the forest. They add this layer of quiet reflection to the scene. Even though there's been destruction, there are still echoes of the past, and maybe even a possibility for renewal or remembrance.
So the painting becomes this really strong visual commentary on our relationship with nature. You have the untouched forest on the edges, and then this cleared path leading towards the sky.
Exactly. It's this visual metaphor for how complex that relationship is.
Yeah. We've talked about some of Bob Camblin's own words, his quotes, throughout this conversation. And it really feels like his philosophy is embedded in his artwork. I keep coming back to this quote. Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both. What does that say to you?
It really captures his belief that things that seem completely different can actually be connected.
Mm,
Like science and spirituality, logic and intuition.
right.
He's saying that we can find truth and meaning in both the rigorous analysis of science, symbolized by the atom, and in those more intuitive, mystical ways of knowing, symbolized by magic. And for him, philosophy and art were bridges between those two worlds.
And he also said art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake. That's pretty powerful.
It is. He's moving away from the idea of art being just a purely aesthetic thing, something separate from life. For him, art is deeply connected to human experience, maybe even essential for navigating life, expressing yourself, or even surviving. And not just physically surviving, but emotionally and spiritually.
There's so much wisdom in his words, like how he emphasized seeing over just looking,
Right.
and how he believed that learning from your mistakes is a crucial part of the creative process. It shows how much thought he put into his art and into life in general.
A lot of his quotes are about being present, actively engaging with the world, truly seeing and understanding, not just passively observing. And that willingness to fail, it shows how resilient and experimental he was. He knew that making mistakes is often how you learn and grow.
And he also had this way of approaching serious themes with a sense of playfulness and humor. He didn't take himself too seriously, which probably made his work more accessible and thought-provoking at the same time.
Definitely. He could find the sublime and the ridiculous, to use his words.
So, lastly, let's talk about Bob Camblin's legacy. It sounds like he left a real mark on the art world, especially in Houston and beyond.
For sure. He's remembered as an important figure in the Houston art scene, especially during the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Right.
And we heard from Earl Staley about how he learned from Camblin, how they collaborated. It shows Camblin's influence as a teacher and a mentor.
And there's this great quote from Penny Serling who said that Camlin questioned everything and everybody and loved to collaborate.
Yeah, she really captured his personality.
He sounds like he was really dynamic, always questioning things and always open to working with others.
Exactly. And it seems like there's this renewed interest in his work, this effort to bring it to a wider audience.
Yeah, to rediscover him.
To make sure his unique vision and contributions aren't forgotten.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Bob Camblin was an artist who defied easy categorization. His work is so rich and layered, full of personal meaning, symbolism, and deep philosophical ideas. And Cleave to the Sea really exemplifies that. It's a beautiful and powerful painting that makes us think about our own journeys, both internal and in the world around us.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into the world of Bob Camblin.
We've tried to give you a clear path through all that information without getting lost in the weeds.
Exactly.
And we want to leave you with this thought. Think about your own path to the sea. What have you cleared away in your life? What remains from the past? What glowing circle represents your own goals and aspirations? And how does understanding the ideas of impermanence and interconnectedness, which Camblin explored in his art, affect how you see your own journey?
It's a good question.
Maybe, just like in Camblin's paintings, the most important thing isn't finding a definite answer, but staying open to the questions and keep exploring.